The air in Gidan Zaki bulls with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Amina's refusal to submit to the binding ritual was the talk of the village. As she walked through the narrow pathways, she could feel the weight of 100 eyes on her, each gaze heavy with judgment, curiosity, or fear. Some of the younger women glanced at her with admiration, a spark of hope kindling in their hearts. They had grown up in the shadows of the widow's curse, watching their mothers and grandmothers endure lives of sorrow and submission. Amina's defiance was something they had never dared to imagine, and it planted the seeds of rebellion within them. But not everyone saw her as a hero. The older villagers, the ones who held tightly to tradition, viewed her actions as a direct threat to the delicate balance that had governed their lives for generations. They whisper among themselves, speaking of the wrath of the ancestors, of how Amina's defiance would bring disaster upon them all. The chief elder, whose authority had been challenged in front of the entire village, was sitting with anger. He had spent years upholding the custom of their people, ensuring that every widow was properly bound, that every tradition was honored. Amina's rebellion was not just an insult to him, it was a challenge to the very fabric of their society. She must be punished, he declared to the council of elders as they gathered in the darkness of his hut. If we allow her to walk free, the spirit of our ancestors will turn against us. She must be made an example. The other elders nodded in agreement, their faces shadowed by the flickering light of the fire. They spoke of curses, of droughts, of sickness that would surely follow if Amina was allowed to go unpunished. But beneath their words was a deeper fear. Fear that the world they knew was beginning to unravel. That night, as the village slept uneasily, a group of men approached Amina's hut. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, and their footsteps were soft against the earth. They had been sent by the elders, their task clear, to bring Amina before the council, to force her to submit to the ritual by any means necessary. But Amina was not asleep. She sat by the fire, her heart pounding in her chest, aware that something was coming. Her defiance had lit a fire within her, but it had also painted a target on her back. She knew that the village would not let her stand against their traditions without a fight. When the men burst into her hut, Amina stood tall, her eyes burning with the same fire that had driven her to defy the elders. She did not struggle as they seized her, did not cry out as they dragged her through the village. But as she was pulled towards the chief's compound, she looked at the faces of those she passed. Faces filled with fear, anger, and in some, a glimmer of hope. At the center of the compound, the elders were waiting. The firelight cast long shadows across their faces, making them appear even more menacing. The chief elder stepped forward, his voice cold and hard as a stone. "Amina, you have defied the will of the ancestors," he said, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at her. "You have brought shame upon this village, and you have endangered us all." Amina met his gaze unflinching. "I have only refused to be bound by chains that are not mine to carry," she replied, her voice steady, despite the fear intense in her heart. The elder's lip curled in a snare. "You speak of chains, but you do not understand the weight of the curse you have brought upon yourself. The ancestors will not be so easily defiled." With a swift motion, he raised his hand, signaling the men to begin the ritual. They moved towards Amina, their intention clear. But before they could lay a hand on her, a voice rang out from the edge of the crowd. "Stop!" It was one of the younger women, her face pale but determined. She stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a courage that had taken root in her heart after witnessing Amina stand. "You cannot force her," she said, her voice trembling slightly but growing stronger with each word. "This is not justice, it is cruelty." The crowd murmured in shock, and others began to stare. The younger generation, emboldened by the woman's word, began to murmur among themselves. For the first time, the iron grip of tradition seemed to waver. But the elder was unmoved. "This is the way it has always been," he said, his voice laced with anger, "and it is the way it must remain." Amina, seeing the fear in the younger woman's eyes, felt a swell of pride and a surge of responsibility. She could not let this man crush the spirit that had only just begun to awaken. She took a deep breath and spoke out, her voice ringing clear and strong. "If this is truly the will of the ancestors, let them strike me down where I stand," she declared. "But I will not submit to a life that is no longer mine." The tension in the air was obvious, the silence heavy with anticipation. The elders waited for the rout of the spirits, for some sign that Amina was strong. But the night remained still, and the ancestors, if they were watching, remained silent.